One of the things that is astonishing to me now is that we're having this big debate about sex education in the schools. What qualifies the people who are pushing this stuff to take over the roles of parents?
Is the country in a better position today than it was half a century ago?
Oh, much worse.
In this video, we're going to watch a brand new interview with the great Thomas Sowell, an actual living legend. Now guys, sometimes we hear the social justice warriors saying everybody has to shut up and listen when they're speaking because they're a person of color or they're this or that victim group. And I think that that's BS. But in this case, this is one of the only cases that I can think of where everyone actually should shut up and listen. Thomas Sowell is 93 years old, and it's so precious to have him giving his wisdom on what's happening in the world at the moment, because his appearances are few and far between these days, and we never know when it might be his last. And this is another fantastic interview, so pay close attention and let's get into it.
Dr. Sowell, when we talk about equality, immediately race pops into mind. It's always about race, racial discrimination, about the founding of the nation, white dominant society, so forth and so on. And you make the case, and you've made this case throughout your life, but it's very poignant in your book, which is, wait a minute, of course this has some impact, but it's not the only thing that has an impact. But why, first of all, what other things have an impact? It's probably an infinite list of things. And secondly, why do they only focus on race on the left?
I guess it's because that's proven to be a politically popular thing to do. But in point of fact, one of the things that's mentioned in the book is a study that was done by the New York Times, of all people, some years ago, where they tried to show the 10 poorest counties in the United States. And they mentioned which ones they were and so on. It turns out that 6 of those 10 counties had a population that was from 90% to 100% white. Now, in the New York Times, they didn't mention the race of the people, but once they told me the counties, I looked it up. And in fact, I followed the average income in those 6 counties over a span of 50 years. And in all those 50 years, all 6 of those counties had a median income lower than the median income of Black Americans. Now, and so the people in those counties faced zero racism because they were white and indistinguishable from all other whites. They didn't have a legacy of slavery, and yet there they were. You have to ask then, clearly there must be other things that cause poverty. We can't just assume that because people of a given race have more poverty than some other people, that race must be the reason. But this has become the automatic kind of thing, and I think most people would be quite surprised. One of the things that happens is that behavior matters, and you see that in so many different ways. For example, I think most people would be surprised to learn that despite the fact that blacks as a whole have a higher poverty rate than whites as a whole, Black married couple families have for more than a quarter of a century, every single year, had a poverty rate under 10%. And in most of those years, the national poverty rate was not as low as 10%. So it's not and you say, well, this is due to institutional racism. In that case, does that mean that the racists make an exception for blacks who are married? I mean, do racists either know or care whether blacks are married? None of these glib explanations stands up to the slightest empirical study.
So Thomas Sowell nails it, as you would expect there. And this is the thing that a lot of people don't realize, is that the race hustling narrative is a pathology. It's something that politicians and intellectuals use to divide us and to make groups feel like victims and ultimately rely upon them for more and keep on voting for them in perpetuity. And I do believe that these people are grifters. The old wake up in the morning, lick your finger, whichever way it's going. And if race is the way it's going, and if race is how you get your votes, and if race is how you sell your books, then have at it. Plus, just think about this. Think about how much easier it is to sell the narrative of, yes, you're a victim. Don't bother trying hard. Here's some free stuff, as opposed to take personal responsibility, work hard. And if you do that, then you will be better off. And if you don't do that, then it's your own fault. And this is the thing about somebody like Thomas Sowell, is that he's never taken the easy route. He's dedicated his whole life to determining what is true by way of empirical data. And he's gathered said data across cultures and throughout historical periods and has written over 40 books. This is a man who is 93 years old and has dedicated his entire life to learning and knowing as much as possible. There is nobody in the world that I can think of that is more qualified to speak on social and cultural issues than Dr. Thomas Sowell. And I truly do believe that his work will echo into the future and that his legacy will be most greatly felt at a time down the line when he's no longer with us. I believe that his work will be George Orwell-like in the prophetic nature of it and its veracity when we read it 50 years down the line. And now onto a little bit about the education system.
One of the big problems about the social justice field is that what they say sounds so good. It's only after you study history that you find out just how bad, how horribly it actually turned out.
Well, these phrases are very nebulous. Social justice. What does that mean? Basically, if you agree with the Marxists and the leftists, then you support social justice. But on the other hand, if you support individuality and capitalism and private property rights, obviously you're anti-social justice. What does all this mean?
Well, that's how they look at it. They seem to assume a world in which if things don't turn out the same for everybody, that means that somebody has done somebody wrong. And that's an incredible assumption that human beings have such enormous control over their own fates individually or collectively. I mean, when I think back over my life, and I'm sure other people can do the same in their lives, there are times that a particular person appeared on the scene and changed the whole trajectory of my life. And it's happened more than once, and I'm sure it's happened in the lives of many other people. There's nobody out there who has all the incredible amount of knowledge required to take over making other people's decisions for them.
Do you find that these radicals, these autocrats basically, this term social justice, do they really mean centralized government, redistribution of wealth, a permanent government that undermines representative government? Isn't this really the nomenclature for that?
Guys, if you're genuinely enjoying this video and if you genuinely get value from my content, then it would help me out massively if you could leave a like on the video and also subscribe to the channel. Back to the clips.
It is, and if you realize what enormously high opinions many of the intellectual elites have of themselves, you can see that what it boils down to is very intellectual people like themselves just simply preempting the decisions of other people in every aspect of their lives. One of the things that is astonishing to me now is that we're having this big debate about sex education in the schools. And to me, the question is, what qualifies the people who are pushing this stuff to take over the roles of parents? What's also very troubling is that this all came out during the COVID pandemic when students were studying at home and the parents got to see what was being taught in the schools. Now, it so happens that 30 years ago, I wrote a book called Inside American Education, in which all of this was laid out just exactly as it's happening now. The fraudulence of it, the appearance that this is responding to what the students want. I can't imagine how many young people in the elementary schools especially are saying that they are a boy but they want to be a girl, or they're a girl and want to be a boy. I can't think of anybody in my whole lifetime who is saying things like that. And if you follow the sort of institutional way these things are done, there are groups outside the school system and inside the school system who want to do this and who know that the parents don't want them to do it, and they do it anyway, and they pretend that they're responding to what the students want. They're not.
No, they are not. They're doing exactly what they want to do with absolutely zero regard for the students. They do not care for their well-being, and they do not care about the students becoming who they are. This is an ideology that's been pumped into the soft heads of young children in order to facilitate a cultural revolution. And Thomas Sowell wrote the book 30 years ago, and he has been sounding the alarm since before then about cultural Marxism, about political correctness, social justice, politicians being extremely irresponsible with economic policies in order to get votes rather than looking out for what's best for the country. He warned us long ago about these exact things that are tearing at the fabric of our society. He understands history and culture and how societies deteriorate and get to dark places. And he knows all too well that it starts with the youth. They target schools. They make students hate old customs, traditions, and their parents. They make them hate the old flag and worship the new one. They target universities, the hotbed of ideas and intellectual discussion, and where social change derives from. These are the institutions where the next CEOs and lawyers and politicians and HR department people will come from. And these people will bleed out into society, and they will dilute absolutely everything with woke cultural Marxist crap. And that is what we are seeing in full flight today. And the way I see it, guys, is like when you look at an exponential chart. And if anybody here does investing of any sort, they'll know that an exponential chart, there's a flat line until boom, one day it just spikes up completely, because you keep on doubling up and doubling up and doubling up until the numbers that are doubling are so large that the chart goes to the moon. People think that this has just happened recently, it's a fad, a social trend, and it'll die up. No, no, no. This has been happening for a very, very long time. We are just seeing the exponential curve right now. You capture the institutions of education, you capture the future. And now, on to the last part, which is unfortunately very telling.
Critical race theory, the 1619 Project, these are really anti-knowledge, aren't they? They're really propaganda devices for the hard left that are being, pushed in our classrooms, pushed in our society, and so forth. These attacks on the American system, do they promote equality? Do they promote unity? Do they promote a melting pot society, or are they intended to destroy this culture?
Clearly, it's the latter. And also, when you said it's not just propaganda, it is propaganda that overtly prevents other views from being heard. If they were just propagandizing, but the students were allowed to learn other things as well, different ways of looking at life, that's one thing. But anyone who, for example, there are people who've taught academic courses on racial and ethnic issues at Harvard and other places who just simply stopped teaching their courses, because if they were saying anything that was different from what the propagandists were saying, you would have violence on the campus and so on, and the university administrators would not protect their classes. So they just stopped doing it. One of the great scholars in this area, the late Stephen Thernstrom, simply stopped teaching his course because you had ignorance silencing knowledge.
You've been studying our country for a very long time. The history, economics, philosophy, you covered the whole horizon. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, today, is the country in a better position today than it was half a century ago, or is it in a worse position today?
Oh, much worse, much worse. The silencing of the other side has now become much more prominent. And the real danger is not in the silly ideas that are being promoted. It's in the fact that nobody else is allowed to reply to them without some danger to themselves.
Do you see in this country a growing police state? I don't necessarily mean a police state like you'll see in these aggressive fascist or Marxist regimes, but sort of slowly but surely, like you're talking about controlling the language, which controls thought and activity. This massive censorship that judges have now ruled on by this administration. You can see the politicization of the Department of Justice and so forth. But let me put it to you this way, a more fine point. Are we a free country today? I remember Mises once saying that Americans talk like Marxists. Are we a free country today, or are we a country on the precipice of losing our freedom?
I think the latter. It's hard for me to see just how we're going to come out of this, especially when people who are so willing to increase the powers of government don't seem to understand that it doesn't matter for what purpose you gave them that power, which may have been good purposes. Once they have that power, they can use it for whatever they want. The Federal Reserve System was set up, for example, to prevent runaway inflation or runaway deflation or bank failures. And the intellectuals were 100% behind that. But the cold fact is that there's been more deflation, as in during the Great Depression, and more inflation for decades on end, and more bank failures than ever occurred prior to the setting up of the Federal Reserve System. But the Federal Reserve System, for example, can force people to do things they don't want to do just because they have the power to hold up what their decisions are. And so the power created for one purpose is then used for some different purpose. When FDR took the United States off the gold standard, he used the law passed during the First World War to prevent trading with enemy nations. But once the power was there, you could use it for anything you wanted to.
This is hard to hear coming from Thomas Sowell, because we all know watching this that he's right. And he brings up a few points here that I find really interesting, namely the massive amounts of power that are being constantly given to the ever-expanding government. And this is why I, like so many others, am such a big fan of Vivek Ramaswamy's idea about shutting down the FBI.
Shut down the FBI.
Or Trump's notion of draining the swamp.
Drain the swamp.
Because at this stage, it seems like that is a do or die issue. Somebody has to come in and gut the bloated bureaucratic establishment, or else it'll just keep expanding. And like Dr. Thomas Sowell said, it doesn't matter for what purpose you give them power. Once they have the power, they can use it for whatever they want. Maybe they need to change the laws surrounding the power that they have to lock people down during a pandemic. Or maybe, because this is such a dangerous virus, we need to force people to get vaccinated. Or maybe, because this person is such a danger to democracy, it's okay to start prosecuting your political opponents. Once the rules change and the goalposts are shifted enough, then it's much, much harder to come back from that. So a bit of a depressing one there, guys, but I don't want to leave you on that note. So what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to leave a link below of a video of a terrified little puppy that's all alone, that gets rescued by some beautiful people who give it a good life. And if that doesn't put a smile on your face, then I don't know what will. So with that, subscribe to the channel right here, guys. And if you want to watch another video, if you don't want to watch the dog getting rescued, then click right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.